Hey everybody, my name is Paul, I'm the gamer Scot, and welcome to my first look at Don't Die Minerva. It's a top-down action RPG twin-stick shooter with roguelike elements, and it's set in a haunted house, so I thought it would be perfect for spooky Halloween season. Before we jump in, just a quick reminder that I stream games like this every Wednesday over at twitch.tv/thegamerscot, so if you want to join me and the rest of the clan, the link is in the description. It's actually hard to talk about roguelike dungeon crawlers these days without either giving too much detail or not enough. So we'll just touch on some of the basics, and you can let me know in the comments if I should go deeper next time.
That's what she said!
It's still in early access on Steam, so bear in mind that anything we talk about here could change before the full release. Right off the bat, the first thing I want to talk about is the art style. Developer Xaviant has definitely managed to capture that whole crazed funhouse aesthetic. The slightly odd carnival music, the unusual proportions of the characters, they've really got that Tim Burton look nailed down. But the good news is that you don't need to worry about Johnny Depp showing up and being all weird in this. You play as Minerva, a girl who discovers a haunted house one night and is basically forced to fight her way through it. You find a couple of friendly ghost advisors who offer tips and upgrades to help you beat the boss, known as the Master. You start each run with just a basic flashlight as your weapon. The ghosts in the haunted house all take damage from light, and you get a bunch of variations in this weapon as you progress. The standard beam, lightning arc, light bulb launchers, explosive bomb bulbs. They all use energy to fire, but that regenerates over time. My favourite weapon is the default standard flashlight because it feels more natural fit for me, but I reckon there's probably something here for everyone. You get a secondary melee attack and a dodge roll. The dodge roll gets you out of trouble but doesn't have any iframes until later. But in my opinion, the most fun thing you get is a pet that attacks along with you. There's a handful of different animals to choose from and they each have different styles of attack. The monkey sits still and throws bombs at anything in range. Dragon flies in a straight line, attacks anything that comes across. The bee spins around you, orbiting and attacking anything that it hits. The bear sits still and does a big AoE attack whenever anything gets close. And the cat runs around doing its own thing, just like you'd expect from a cat, and attacking anything that gets close to it. They all have their own health bars and will despawn after a certain amount of time, but you can cast them as long as you've got enough energy left over. I found the cat the most useful, but that just might be my playstyle. The roguelike metagame elements come into play with the two different currencies, coins and essence. Don't worry though, there are no microtransactions in here. Both drop randomly from enemies and destructible objects in the game world. Coins are spent on upgrades for the run you're currently on, and essence is spent unlocking stuff for future runs. On each floor of the haunted house there's a fountain that teleports you back outside so you can spend anything you've collected. The store sells a few items like boots, necklaces, backpacks and so on, and that's where you spend your coins. You meet and unlock some NPCs along the way and it's through them that you spend your essence. These upgrades are permanent, and once unlocked they'll affect every one of your future runs. So as long as you cash them in before you die, no run is a complete waste. I feel like that's the way all of these dungeon crawlers should work, so that progress doesn't feel like endlessly bashing your head off a wall, and unfortunately not everyone does it that way. The one downside of this that I found is that my essence upgrades have got me to the point where the items that drop are so good, there's nothing in the shop really worth buying. So it means my coins just build up and build up through the run and then end up just getting lost when I die. There's upgrades to keep some of those coins when you respawn, but again it's unlikely that any of the items you can afford at the start of a run are going to be better than the items you'll pick up on the first floor, especially after you've upgraded that initial experience. That's something that might be fixed before the full launch though. The RPG elements come into play with those items. There are 4 different colour coded stats that you'll find on most items and they have a direct effect on your character. Weapon damage in purple, melee damage and health in yellow, pet damage in red, and armour in blue. When you pick things up you see a side by side comparison before you equip it, and later in the game you start seeing stat modifiers on top of the colours, so it's not quite as obvious what a specific item is going to do as you might think. So you might find yourself having to make the difficult choice between, for example, a great item with +3 red and 10% damage, or another one with +2 purple but 25% attack speed. It's a really interesting way to force you to switch up your game. Which is better, +3 physical or 25% extra health? You need to experiment to find out. Just like fellow roguelike Dead Cells, you'll probably find yourself focusing on just one or two of these stats. Oftentimes you end up just accidentally making your run weaker if you try to balance out all four rather than just building up a couple of them. So it's quite a lot to think about, and it is really easy to accidentally break a really great build by picking up a single item you thought was going to help. One thing I do appreciate about this upgrade system is that your old items stay on the ground. So as long as you're on that floor, you can always swap back if you don't like a change that you made. The goal of every floor is to reach the elevator to the next level. But in order to use that elevator, you need to find a key for it, which means hunting around until you find the room with a big old key floating in the middle. Unlike a lot of the other items which can lie on the ground, the key is automatically given to you when you finish the room, so you don't need to hang around after. But at least in the early game, it's worth exploring as much of the floor as you can to eke out those coins and essence gems. As you'd expect, the floors of the haunted house get tougher as you get deeper, with more enemies and environmental hazards appearing. So stuff like spikes in the floor, axes that swing from the ceiling, cannonballs that roll across the level. The enemies start to have slime that damages you if you step in it, more projectiles and stuff like that. The enemy selection's fun and perfect for the setting. Ghosts wrapped in chains, angry books, bats, zombies, etc, etc. It's all exactly on brand for the art style. If you can imagine it in Beetlejuice, it's probably here. That said, you do tend to see the same enemies quite frequently. Again, that's something that could be easily changed in a future update, but right now it feels like you see the same handful of enemies multiple times on each floor. And runs can take a long time. You'll see from some of the footage that I've got runs here that took well over an hour, sometimes even up to an hour and a half. That says a long time for a single dungeon run compared to things like Binding of Isaac or Enter the Gungeon or Nuclear Throne. I can definitely see that kind of thing maybe putting people off. But because you can work on your meta unlocks during every run, it doesn't necessarily feel like each one is super long. It does mean though that unlike those other games, you'll probably only want to do a couple of runs in Don't Die Minerva before you call it a day. With that in mind, it might be good to know that you can quit out at any time and continue a run later, so you don't need to worry about doing the whole thing in one sitting. Combat feels nice and chunky, and there's some obvious weight to everything in the game world. Dead enemies ragdoll, which is funny, but sometimes a bit distracting as well. With the sheer number of enemies and projectiles on screen, sometimes it can be hard to keep track of everything that's going on. But I feel like that's actually an intentional part of the whole experience rather than a problem to fix. I've played maybe 4 hours or so for this video, with about 10 in total, but I still haven't managed to beat the master on the 3rd floor, so I don't know how the story ends. But I think it will only be a few more runs before I get there. I do have a couple of minor queries. Firstly is why each major floor after the boss fights uses a completely new elevator to restart the game. It's not a problem per se, but it feels like an unnecessary barrier that delays just getting back into the action. They might have reasons for it, I just can't work out what they are. But more important than that is this stats screen. Look at it. It's an absolute mess, and it definitely needs someone to tidy it up. I know there's a lot of stuff to track, but this can't be the best way to do it. Jeez. Hopefully, again, that's something that will be addressed before the full release of the game. There's also what I assume is a bug with some of the AI. Certain enemies that fly, skull, eyes, and books mainly, aren't behaving aggressively. They run off and hide in corners, or they get lost somewhere in the room. It doesn't seem like the right behaviour for them, and it can be a pain to track them down when the doors won't unlock. So again, hopefully that's something that'll be fixed soon too. Don't Die Minerva is not a game for everyone. It might be a little too casual for the hardcore roguelike Nuclear Throne or Spelunky fan. It might be a little too complex for people just looking for a good action RPG or twin stick shooter. But for people like me, somewhere in the middle of those, you should have a good time. And if you had a good time with this video, you see what I did there, huh? Please hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. If you hated it, the dislike button is right there too. And as I said, I stream games like this every Wednesday on Twitch, so it would be great to see you over there. Thank you very, very much for watching. I'm the Gamer Scot, and I'll see you next time.